Burnout in midlife doesn't nudge you gently. It just slaps you straight across the face, and suddenly you don't even recognize your own life. I'm Mary, and burnout nearly broke me. Not in a dramatic movie meltdown kind of way, but in that quiet, suffocating Gen X, I'm fine, everything's fine kind of way that we've all just mastered a little too well, if you know what I mean. I want to talk about what burnout really looked like for me, how I finally noticed it, and what healing is starting to look like. You know, as I think about it, some of the first signs of burnout, I probably ignored, honestly. I know that at work I was starting to be really impatient, especially with some of the people that ask questions for the sake of asking questions, or always had to have input and, didn't really add anything of substance, at least that I thought. So I know that I started to lose patience at work for sure. It also started to show up in just ways that I would react to normal everyday situations. I think my irritation level was like off the charts. Little things would start to irritate me, like, the person in line in front of me wasn't moving forward or wasn't paying attention to what was going on. And I found myself getting irritated with lots of little things that normally I would just brush off and not even think about. And I think the third thing where I really started to wake up to the burnout was just how I felt every day. I wasn't happy. I didn't have any energy. I was always tired. I didn't feel like doing things that normally that I would enjoy. And I found myself kind of becoming a bit of a hermit. I would go to work, I would finish work, and just my life was like a routine, if anything else. And I wasn't seeking any joy in it. And that's not what I'm like typically. I like to find the fun things in life. So I really think that those were the three things that really started to wake me up to what burnout really looked like for me. And I think one of the things that, at least for me, I really started to realize was just how Gen X conditioning and the way that we were brought up really led to the fact that I didn't even recognize burnout until it was too late, if you will. We're conditioned to always be the strong ones. Don't let anything get to you. Just continue to push forward the way that you always had. Just keep going. Shoulder everything quietly. These are things that, our generation, frankly, we were wired to do. And, I remember that my parents often told me, don't ask for help. Always try and figure things out on your own first. And while I think that that's really good advice in many situations, when it comes to dealing with emotions, I think I've learned that that's not really good advice, right? We don't even admit that we need help even when we need help in many cases. And so I think that conditioning that all of us Gen Xers grew up with, if you get hurt, rub some dirt in it. While I think that has really served us well in many ways, it lets us dwell in some of the negatives in our lives that perhaps we probably should have recognized a little bit sooner and sought help, or at least sought tools and resources for us to actually deal with it better. So relating back to burnout, in my own situation, I think one of the first things that I started to do was just let myself give myself permission to be burned out, right? The first thing was, this is an emotion. This is something that's actually happening to me. And I had to actually just recognize that it was there. And then I needed to do something about it. So that was really step number one. And then the second thing that I started to do was giving myself permission to say no and to really start setting some boundaries in my life, whether that was at work or whether that was at home. And, or in my personal life. setting those boundaries and giving myself permission to say no to some of the things, or to say, well, I can give you input on that, but I'm not actually going to take the leadership or take the reins on that particular project. That's how it started to show up at work. Whereas previously I would have just shouldered the whole thing and, done everything. At home and with my own personal relationships, it started to show up as things like, well, if I didn't feel like going out on a Saturday, I would just say, you know what, it's been a tough week. I'm just not feeling up to it. I don't think that I'd be really good company tonight. So let's reschedule. And what's really interesting, I really found my true friends, right? My true friends were like, oh my gosh, of course, let's reschedule for another date. And they were gracious and forgiving. And I was always really scared to say no to things, because I'm like, if I don't go, then they're not going to invite me again. It's a really good way to find out who your true friends really are. And then at work, how that started to show up was I wasn't overloaded all the time anymore. I felt like I could do what I was responsible for and give my energy to those things while still offering support and guidance to others to accomplish what they were trying to accomplish. But just because somebody asked me for my help didn't mean that I was going to actually, bend over backwards to help make sure that everything that they were doing was successful as well. So if you're a Gen X woman that's going through some form of burnout, and it's going to show up differently for everybody, what I want you to know is that you don't have to suffer alone in silence. You don't have to accept the way that you're feeling. My first piece of advice is just admit it, look inward and say, and own up to it, right? It's okay if you're suffering from burnout. It's okay if you're not feeling like the best version of yourself. So just recognize that and declare it to yourself if you can't declare it to somebody else, right? The other thing that I want you to know is that you're not alone. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're not betraying yourself. All of those things that, we Gen X women have learned to talk to ourselves, to keep ourselves going. You don't have to keep doing that, right? You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to earn boundaries. You are allowed to just set them. And I really encourage you to do exactly that. If burnout is whispering to you or screaming at you right now, don't do what I did and just ignore it. We Gen X women, we've got to do this together. We've got to start sharing some of our experiences. So talk to me in the comments. Tell me, what does burnout look like for you? How is it feeling? How is it making you show up in your life, your work, your relationships, your friendships, right? I promise somebody here needs to hear your story, or at least needs to feel like, oh, somebody else gets it. And if you're trying to rebuild a life that feels like you again, subscribe. Around here, the detour is the damn point.